Judge Jim Gray, who is a candidate for the nomination of the Libertarian Party for President of the United States. He is uh, he actually joined the race quite recently, and so I'm going to ask him a bunch of questions over the next 1 to 2 hours. And if people have questions, you can put them in the chat. And if we have time at the end, I will ask him some questions from the chat, or I might pop them in if they're relevant there. But he does have a hard deadline, so he can't stay after the 2 hour mark. So let me get right into the questions. First of all, tell us a bit about your background. So your educational background, your career, and your political history.
Okay, well, Dr. Chuck, first of all, thank you. It's a pleasure to be able to be with you. And I think our audience should know that none of these questions have been staged or whatever. So they're going to be hitting me cold. But that one's one that doesn't take a great deal of time to prepare. I graduated from UCLA in 1966. Go Bruins, saw the UCLA championship basketball teams begin. Then I was in the Peace Corps in Costa Rica for 2 years. I actually should, in my opinion, doctor, be in the Guinness Book of Records because I think I brushed my teeth in front of more elementary school classes than anyone else in history, but so far that hasn't caught on. I was being drafted as soon as I got back to law school at USC. That was in 1968. So I joined the Naval ROTC in order to get through my college and schooling. And then I became a Navy JAG officer. But actually, during a training cruise, when I was a midshipman between my second and third year of law school, I was sent to the waters of Vietnam, where the entire ship was awarded a combat action ribbon, including me, on the USS Meeker County when we were going up and down the Mekong and Qua Bo Di and other various rivers. So that was a bit ironic because just at the end of my second year, I actually led a peace march from the steps of USC to the steps of the City Hall in Los Angeles, where we mailed 20,000 letters to President Nixon telling and demanding that he remove our troops from Cambodia. Then within about 2 months, I was actually just close to Cambodia and in Vietnam. So that's kind of one of the ironies of my life. Thereafter, after the military, I was a Navy JAG officer, and then I was a federal prosecutor in Los Angeles, ended up by heading a unit prosecuting frauds against the VA and FHA, prosecuted quite a few bank vice presidents, actually. Thereafter, I was in private practice for a while and then was appointed to the bench. So I was a trial court judge here in Orange County, California for about 25 years. Did numbers of things, probably settled the first Catholic priest child sexual molestation case in the country back in, I think, 2001, but also did something really unusual for a sitting trial court judge. But based upon my experience, by 1992, I'd been a judge for 9 years, of course, a federal prosecutor and criminal defense attorney before that. And I told anyone that would listen that our nation's policy of drug prohibition was a failure and that we had to change it. And basically, it didn't matter what we changed it to because we couldn't do it worse if we tried. Yes, I got quite a bit of heat from that, also got a great deal of support. But I really felt that even though I put my professional life at risk, there were some things more important than job security. And I continued thereafter. I've been involved in lots of media then as a result of that. The John Stossel ABC News specials, O'Reilly Factor twice. He didn't really like me, but he invited me back. So that was something. But I've spoken out really quite a bit about that, kind of a libertarian thing to do. I was then a member of the Libertarian Party with the passage of the so-called Patriot Act. This direct frontal assault on civil liberties was something that I simply could not be a part of any group that would condone, much less assist that assault. So it literally took me 13 seconds to determine that I really am a libertarian, and of course I will be for life. I ran as a U.S. Senate candidate as a libertarian in 2004, and actually I got to know David Nolan quite well, and one of our founders, and he assisted me rather strongly in that campaign. And then I was proud to have been the Libertarian Party's nominee with Governor Gary Johnson. I was his running mate in 2012. So that's basically my background. Along the way, I adopted a son from Vietnam. He's now 47 years old, but I have pretty close ties to the Vietnamese community. I do speak Spanish still pretty fluently and have contacts there. And just believe, doctor, that with all of this polarization going on in our country, that the American people are crying out for someone that will work well with everyone. We would put in a coalition government. Yes, certainly libertarians and independents, but also Republicans and Democrats, as long as they shared our philosophy of financial responsibility at all levels of society, live and let live, treat people with respect, and not only don't tread on me, but don't tread on anybody. So that's pretty much my background, and I've been had a good life, and I'm still living a good life.
So you can just call me Chuck for the rest of the interview. No need to call me doctor. So in your when you were judge of a trial court, was that a specialized court or a court of general jurisdiction? In other words, was it criminal, civil, family, or just general?
Over 25 years, it was general. We're a fairly large court in Orange County, so we would have different calendars. And over that time, I sat on, I think, every calendar except family law. I never did divorces, but oh gosh, civil, criminal, mental health, probate, juvenile, adoptions. I pretty much did it all. I mostly specialized in civil, but I have a big background in criminal as well.
So do you have any executive or managerial experience that you think would make you more qualified to be president and overseeing the executive branch?
Chuck, nobody can be president. It's so far-ranging. You have to get good people, and then you have to have faith in them, listen to them, and make your decisions. I have some administrative experience, limited. I ran my own courtroom. I had my own staff. I was the chair of the Orange County chapter of the World Affairs Council for the last couple of years, and that's administrative experience. But what I bring to this, as a judge, you're trained to listen. You're trained to listen to the evidence, consider it, weigh its viability, and then make a decision, and then explain that decision. And I think as a judge, that puts me in a strong position for the presidency when I win it.
Why are you running for president?
I think that our country cries out for what we libertarians provide. Libertarians are the only political party that do not want to and would not benefit by being involved in government. We will treat everybody. We will unite the Americans. We will bring people together. We will stop this dreadful polarization that's going on. People are crying out for a third voice. And I think that with my background, at all levels of society. I was in the Peace Corps. I care about people. I was in the military. I care about our military and certainly our security. All the way along there, that I think I will be able to bring people together in settling my cases. I do that, and I've been quite successful. For example, it's one of my real triumphs, I believe. A while ago, maybe 20 years ago, I had a case involving a brother suing a brother. And by the time I was done, they hadn't spoken to each other in 13 years. By the time I was listening, asking a few questions, what do you think your brother felt when this happened? Things like that. I had the two of them standing arm in arm in my courtroom. The plaintiff brother said that he was going to dismiss the case. They'd work it out together. I can't believe we haven't spoken to each other for so long. And they left my courtroom arm in arm. Now, that doesn't happen very often, but I have a way of being able to help people address and resolve their difficulties. And I think as president that I will be uniquely qualified to be able to do that. That's certainly my bent. There are other issues as well. You know, even this Palestinian-Israeli issue, which is the biggest tinderbox area in the world. I think that with the United States' help, we could set up an atmosphere in which they could talk with each other, work some of these problems out, and not solve them, because there is no solution to most of these to human problems. We only can resolve them, pick them up, dust them off, aim them in the right direction, and then let them get on with their lives. I believe in the security of Israel. I want them to be able to thrive. And one of the best ways that can happen is to have the Palestinian people also be able to have their security and thrive as well. I think we can do that. That's just one example, but it's a very large one. I think I'm convinced that I've been able to do this in the past, and I'd be able to offer myself to the country in the future.
How would you describe the libertarian philosophy to a voter unfamiliar with libertarians?
I go back to that fellow, maybe you've heard of him before, Thomas Jefferson, who is a prototype libertarian. And he said, among other things, I don't care if you worship one God, 20 gods, or no God. It doesn't pick my pocket, and it doesn't break my leg. In other words, live and let live. That you should be able, as an adult, to live your life as you please, as long as it doesn't wrongly affect other people's rights to do the same. That's pretty much libertarians. Don't tread on me, don't tread on anyone, to get government out of our lives. I understand, Chuck, and you're an economist, so I know you do. Think about it. I'd ask our viewers to think about this. Can you think of any time in which the government has gotten into the marketplace, in which the quality did not go down and the prices did not go up? And that's certainly true with regard to healthcare. That's demonstrable. And it's also true with education. It's true in any area that you're going to think about. Libertarians, of course we need laws. Of course we have to prosecute frauds and we have to prosecute burglars and the rest of that. But when it comes down to it, it makes as much sense to me, and to any libertarian, I believe, to have the government control what I put into my body, for example, as it does what I put into my mind. It's none of their business. So, for example, it makes as much sense to me to go back to this drug problem, to put Robert Downey Jr. in jail for his heroin problem. And he's had this over the course of his lifetime. He's making good movies, but he'll have to be careful. He'll have that continual craving. But it makes as much sense to me to put Robert Downey Jr. in jail for his heroin problem as it would have Betty Ford in jail for her alcohol problem. It's the same thing. It's a medical issue. Bring them closer to medical professionals that can help them instead of labeling them as automatic criminals and pushing them farther away. But if Robert Downey Jr., Betty Ford, you or I, Chuck, drive a motor vehicle impaired by, you name it, methamphetamines, heroin, alcohol, which is my drug of choice, heroin, whichever, that's a crime. What's the difference? And that's a question really our country has never asked. What's the difference? Well, now by your actions, you're putting our safety at risk, legitimate criminal justice issue. But if I just am harming myself, that's none of anyone else's business. So when it comes down to it, if you look at the criminal justice system, and I've been in that pretty much all my professional life, it's really designed and is effective at protecting us from each other. But it's not designed for and totally ineffective at protecting us from ourselves. It just doesn't work. So when it comes down to it as well, I say this, we should reserve our prison space for people that we're afraid of, not people we're mad at. I think all of those things address on a practical level what a libertarian is, what our libertarian principles are, what our libertarian approaches are. And as soon as our country understands this, our campaign, Larry Sharp, by the way, Mr. Libertarian, has agreed to be my running mate. Our campaign will make libertarianism accessible to the entire country. And people will start then seeing, hey, that will change the culture. Our other libertarian candidates down ballot, everywhere else, will get a lot more legitimized, a lot more of a hearing when we make this accessible. And Gray Sharp 2020 is going to do that.
What are your top 3 issues? And can you talk a bit about each one?
Yes, I think that this recent pandemic has really called attention to the problems of government intrusion. That, first of all, the federal government flat out failed us with regard to planning for emergencies. No, they didn't know what, when, or where. It could have been an earthquake, it could have been a hurricane, certainly could be a pandemic, but they were caught flat-footed. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't have medical issues arranged or thought about in advance, because by the time the emergency happens, it's too late, and they failed us. Then they overreacted. They overreacted basically politically. What did they do? The governors, even the president, mayors, they shut down the economy. Why? Because I'm a mayor. I'm going to do everything I can to show you that you're going to stay healthy. So if you stay healthy, I'm a hero. I was successful. And if you get sick, oh, I have plausible deniability because I did everything I could. Well, and that's fine and that's important, but an incredibly important criterion also issue was our jobs, our businesses. That wasn't even a part of the conversation. And that's where libertarians would differ. By the way, the government impeded the private sector from being able to get testing, to be able to start working on antibodies, be able to get masks, to get ventilated. Oh, you don't have a permit to get into ventilators, Elon Musk, so we're not going to let you do that. And that caused weeks and weeks of delay. Further, that is an issue. People just don't understand that. And it's going to wreak economic havoc on us and our children. Many of those hundreds of thousands of businesses that were closed will never recover. And when it comes down to it, it's just arbitrary. Last week, I went to a bank. Outside the bank, they had a sign. No one is allowed in the bank without wearing a mask. I had a mask, perfectly fine. Then they said, keep your distancing. We will do that. And all of our employees will be wearing gloves and they will have a mask on. And we're going to protect our employees as well as our customers. Now, I, as an adult, could then make a decision. I said, look, I'm going to be pretty much protected here. I'm going to do business in that bank. But had I been 80 years old with pneumonia, I wouldn't get close. But allow the businesses to make those advertising. I've seen some businesses advertise, hey, we have filtration, air filters in our business. So come in. And government is arbitrary. Example again. So if I have a small hardware store, I'm not an indispensable business. They close me down. But people can go to these box stores, you know, Costco's, whatever, Home Depot, and they can buy my hardware. They can buy clothing, they can buy fruits, vegetables, they can buy hardware, they can buy heating and air conditioning. So that's arbitrary. You close some down arbitrarily and then keep others open. And that's simply wrong. It's going to be arbitrary. And then government also has shown, these are all issues that must be addressed. All of this money that they're throwing now at these bailouts or whatever, it's arbitrary. And by the way, they don't have the money. That's going to be my second issue with the deficits. But you noticed, Chuck, that the Kennedy Center was receiving, I think it was $15 million in the bailout. And there's actually a question asked, of all things, why the Kennedy Center? And the response was, oh, they were harmed. They were closed. They suffered harm by this. True, certainly so. But what about all the other theaters in the country? No, they get nothing. It's arbitrary. Libertarians don't do that. We need to shine a light on this. The government caused a lot of the problem. The government impeded private enterprise from being able to stave it off, and then government threw money that they didn't have. I agree that it's critically important for the government to get honest information out into the marketplace. And I agree that this is a serious issue, but it was really aggravated by government. That is a big issue. Number two is the deficit. I told you I was with the World Affairs Council as chair for a while here in Orange County. We bring in speakers that talk about public events, ambassadors, former military generals, people had the consul general from Turkey recently. So at the end of a presentation by a really experienced ambassador, actually John Negroponte, who'd been highly placed in the State Department, gave us a rundown of what was going on in the country and the world. And then the first question was, Mr. Ambassador, what's the biggest security threat to the United States of America today? And without batting an eye, he said, it's the deficit. By the way, we've added $2.6 trillion to that in the last couple of months. But that is a security issue. We are putting our safety at risk. We're putting our children's economic future and security future at risk. And by the way, I just was blessed 5 days ago to be a grandfather. We have now little Hudson. He's 5 days old, and I'm now a grandfather for the first time. I held him for the first time, saw him yesterday, and looking down at this little infant, you have to get teary-eyed because he's bankrupt. The way our government is spending money that it doesn't have, he is bankrupt. And libertarians are the only ones that talk about this, and shame on the rest of them. But the problem is, you know, it's the system. Politicians do not care about the future. They don't. They only care about the next election. So as long as I borrow lots of money, but I look good today, we'll let somebody else worry about it. As it called, kick the can down the road, Chuck, and you know about that. Well, now there's basically no road. We're kind of on a dirt path. That's really, it's time to face reality. Libertarians are a party of principle. We must make sure that they are also a party of reality and spread that word. And that's the second issue. The third issue is, like I was talking about before, I guess, you can't have government involvement in the marketplace without causing prices to increase and quality to decrease. And the healthcare system is simply the right way of going. P.J. O'Rourke one time said that if you think healthcare is expensive now, wait till it's free. You know, I was raised in the in the 1950s, early 1960s, and it just was not an issue, not a point of conversation that we don't have enough emergency rooms. We don't get in quality healthcare for reasonable prices. That just wasn't even discussed. And then we start getting the government involvement. Started with Medicare, of course, and then it got into Medicaid and all of these other complications where now you have all these middlemen making the decisions. And the prices have gone up, have you noticed? And the quality has come down. But what you do is you have medical savings accounts, you get competition back into the system. And then, yes, I want to take care of people. So if they can't afford it, you issue government vouchers on a sliding scale depending upon their financial ability, which they can use to purchase health insurance on the private sector and also even co-pays if necessary. But then bring back competition into this field and we will again become finding that excellence. And it's the same thing with regard to education, which is a huge issue. Chuck, as you know, today it is national tragedy that we have too many schools failing our children, usually, as I'm sure you've noticed, in the lower economic areas, which regretfully are frequently with African Americans and Hispanics. And if we could empower, that's the word I mean to use, empower the parents to choose where their government money would be spent for the education of their children, they would choose excellence. And you know what? If Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Indiana, and numbers of places in Florida, even New Orleans were key in examples, they will receive it. So we have to make a decision as a country. What is the purpose of the educational system? Number one, to educate our children. What a concept. Or number two, to protect below average teachers. And guess what we're doing today? It is an atrocity because if you don't get a good education, you will probably never live up to your expectations. And all the studies show, regardless of the economics level, if you have quality education, all of the students will thrive. And that is something that our campaign will focus upon. To the degree that, by the way, I know I'm getting carried on here, but I wrote an editorial along with two other really distinguished people here in Orange County. And it was labeled an open letter to the ACLU, to MALDEF, and the NAACP. Why? Because, again, quoting, we have too many schools failing our children, mostly in lower economic areas, mostly with your constituents, people that are African American, Hispanic, the economically lowered. Why are you not carrying the torch for school choice? Why are you not leading the charge to help your constituents? And I submitted it to the Los Angeles Times, and they rejected it by return mail because the teachers' unions are so strong. So I've not even been able to get that published. I've submitted it to a couple of other periodicals as well, but that is something that we will be addressing, because if African American, Hispanic parents knew the possibilities, they will flood to vote for libertarians and bring in school choice, school quality, basically begun by Milton Friedman, who's a hero of mine and I believe of yours. So those are our three. There's certainly more sunset provisions to shine a light on various federal agencies. What have you done for the last 5 years? What have you accomplished? How much did it cost? What do you propose to do for the next 5 years? What are you asking for a budget? And if we start shining that light, having that audit publicly, a lot of these are duplicated, unnecessary, simply probably counterproductive. We will pare them down significantly. We might even end up repealing or getting rid of some of these federal agencies. Top on the list for me would be the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which I'd love to talk about if you wish.
We'll see if we have time for that. Is there any plank in the Libertarian Party platform that you disagree with? If so, which ones and why?
You know, you can't, life is complicated. I know you've heard it here first, but I am a practical person. And so if you start getting into issues like abortion, the taxes, I mean, all of these are important, but they're nuanced. So if you're going to say that taxes are no longer necessary, I'm going to disagree with that. We do need a federal government, of course. Where? Well, Article 1, Section 8 pretty much sets it forth. If you're going to have a military, it's expensive. I'm sorry, Chuck, but fighter airplanes are expensive, so are fighter pilots, and you're going to need to pay for those. So you're going to need to have taxes. Our platform kind of negates having the need for taxes. It's just, that is unrealistic. But you know, I'm a pragmatist. I am a libertarian because that's what works the most, and I'm proud of that. If you want to get some other things that are maybe not quite as libertarian, I would like Milton Friedman put in a safety net to help people below which they should not fall, not because we have to. In fact, my philosophy directly is, I could be bleeding on the street right here. Well, actually, I'm pointing at my dog. She's under my desk. But I could be bleeding under the street right here, and you would have no legal obligation to help me whatsoever, unless you cause my injuries. That would be different. But we will because we want to, because we're compassionate people. So voluntarily, I would put in a safety net, basically like Milton Friedman outlined. I revise it a little bit, but and let me quickly say too, I told you that I ran for U.S. Senate as a Libertarian. I got a maximum contribution check from Milton Friedman, and I almost didn't cash it. I almost just framed it, but I eventually succumbed and took a photocopy of it, which I still have hanging in my wall. But I was really proud that he did that. He also endorsed the book that I wrote, which is called Why Our Drug Laws Have Failed and What We Can Do About It, a judicial indictment of the war on drugs. So I'm very, very proud of both of those things.
So you entered the race for the nomination relatively late. I guess first of all, could you tell me when you entered the race? What did you remember the date?
It was in about the middle of April. It's
Okay.
about 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago. We've done amazing things in that 2.5 weeks.
Since then, how many state conventions have you visited in person, and how many have you addressed remotely?
Well, none since then because they didn't have any. I've been involved in several debates, but prior to that, I was at the Libertarian Convention. I was requested to address them in Mississippi and in California. And some people have said, oh, it just isn't fair that Gray Sharp have come into this so late because they didn't have to go around to all of these Libertarian conventions. It's actually a handicap, Chuck. I was not able to meet people and get them to know me and my platform. So I really should have been well behind the 8 ball. Had there been a stronger candidate, this nomination would have been locked up already. But none of the candidates have my background. None of them will be able to do what Larry Sharp and Judge Jim Gray will be able to do.
When you entered the race, did the fact that Lincoln Chafee had dropped out, was that a factor in you entering the race?
It was the factor. I was supporting Governor Chafee. He was then a Republican U.S. Senator to vote against going into Iraq. I was campaigning actually at that time for U.S. Senate as a Libertarian and said as publicly as I could, if we put our troops into Iraq, it will be the biggest mistake of my lifetime. And absolutely nothing has happened since that time to change my mind. So I was supporting Lincoln Chafee. He understands the deficit. I actually have, maybe I'm in your competition with you, but I have a radio podcast as well. It's on the Voice America Network, the variety channel. It's called All Rise, The Libertarian Way with Judge Jim Gray. And I interviewed Governor Chafee, and I thought he did a really fine job. And he convinced me that he would be a good candidate. I was on a telephone conference call with him and his staff about 3 weeks ago, Saturday. And he announced at that time in a really kind of downcast voice that he was going to, 2 hours from now, tell the Wyoming delegation that he was going to withdraw from the race. And I virtually pleaded with him, don't do that. Your party needs you, your country needs you, we need your voice, we need your background, we need your leadership. And he said in a rather flat voice, Judge, I have made my decision. So he hung up, and then the staff asked me if I would run. And they turned the tables on me, literally, Chuck. They said, well, as a matter of loyalty to your party, loyalty to the country, please, Judge Gray, we need your leadership. So I kind of backed off a little and said, well, give me 2 or 3 days and I'll think about it. I'll call various people. And in those 2 or 3 days, I did. And I called people from around the country. People like Mark Rutherford, for example, out of Indiana, the chair there, said if I were to run, he'd endorse me, and he has. So finally, I was talking with Larry Sharp in New York. And by the way, he was the one that came up with the idea of All Rise being kind of a play on words with when a judge enters, but I thought that was kind of clever. But finally, he was encouraging me to run as well. So I turned the tables on him and said, all right, Sharp, put your money where your mouth is. If you will run as my running mate, I will run as well. His answer was, quote, yes, yes, yes. So we are now running. But that's the basis for it. I was not planning on doing it, but I think that I am a natural for this. I'm proud to be in the race. We'll talk maybe about our campaign staff, but in 2.5 weeks, we've really put together an amazing number of enthusiastic, credible, capable people, and I'm proud of our team.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about next. So who is your campaign manager?
It's Boomer Shannon. He was the successful campaign manager for Jeff Hewitt, who ran as a Libertarian for the Board of Supervisors in Riverside County, doing a splendid job there, and he's endorsed our campaign as well. Oh gosh, I have Michael Pickens, who is in the state of Washington, Ryan Cooper. I've had, oh goodness, Joe Vaccarino in Florida, who is just a wonderful lady and really synthesizes messages well. So many people who are involved with social media. I tell folks, not really joking, that if you want to know my techie ability, I'm almost ready to grapple with the Y2K problem. Not quite, but I think I'm almost there. So I certainly need help with my Twitter and my Facebook and WordPress and all that, which I couldn't find if I tried. But they're doing this for us, and they're just dedicated people. Yesterday, we had a telephone conference call for our captains in all 50 states. I think we have 35 now and names of 15 others. We've really, in two and a half weeks, we've done an amazing job. I'm very proud of them. By the way, you probably know that Mark Whitney, when I entered the race, was a candidate for president. After the first debate, he dropped out of the race and endorsed Gray Sharp, our campaign. So I'm proud of that as well.
How much money have you raised so far?
Well, that's a sorry subject because we've had to chase away a lot of money because we're late in getting in here. And so we didn't have our PayPal accounts set up. Oh, goodness. I took so much heat from Joe Vaccarino, for example, on 420. She had up and running, but we couldn't accept the donation. So we're just getting started with that. But I myself have received probably 10 people saying that they would donate, just volunteering this, and we're going to raise some money. We're not going to ever raise the tens of millions of dollars that the Republicans and Democrats have, but we have a strategy actually for winning the presidency, and we're going to pursue it.
Where can people find out more about your campaign as far as website and social media?
Thank you. Certainly. It's www.graysharp2020.com. Sharp is spelled SHARPE, and of course, Gray is GRAY. So it's graysharp2020.com. And if you want, and we're getting pretty good on there, but if you want to learn more about me, Chuck, I have written more about the political issues than any other presidential candidate in history, I would warrant, including James Madison. For 3 years, I wrote a weekly column in a local newspaper. I've written a blog called 2 Paragraphs for Liberty for the last 3 years, and they're all out there. It's been published in a book as well, 2 Paragraphs for Liberty, solutions that are practical, effective, responsible, libertarian, always putting the word libertarian in here to mainstream that because we are the mainstream party. So you can learn anything about my views with regard to the death penalty, health, education, going to war, all of these sorts of things, responsibility, it's all out there. And in fact, so I've written 4 books and 2 musicals. I was telling you earlier, because I understand that you're from Philadelphia, I've written a musical called Convention, The Birth of America. Actually sang the encore, which George Washington comes out and speaks to the people. What now? We're in year 2020? Well, these are our ancestors. Do you want to say anything to them? Well, yes, I do. And then I sang the encore of George Washington saying, it's you. You are the we. It's now your responsibility to protect our Constitution and our freedom. So I sang that at the Mississippi LP convention, as well as the California and several other places. I'm not going to inflict that on you now, unless you beg me. But so I was talking to you about Philadelphia. I'm in negotiations with the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, which you know is right next to the Independence Hall, trying to get them or interest them in performing my musical, and we're making some progress. It's pretty exciting stuff.
Great. So suppose you get the Libertarian Party nomination. Short of getting elected president, do you have any less ambitious goals we could use as metrics to judge the success of your campaign? For example, you're trying to maximize votes, to sell books, to increase party membership, or some other goal?
Chuck, our campaign, more than any other, I think, in our country's history, in our party's history, will be able to change the culture. We'll be able to make libertarianism and our principles and our values and our approaches accessible to the average American. I think our campaign will help the average American again to rethink the involvement of government in his or their lives. And I think we'll be able then to change the culture, to have people understand who libertarians really are. one one of my advisors, actually Ryan Cooper, I'm gonna rat him out here, just sent me a joke today saying, well, we're lobstertarians and people think that we're shellfish. Well, okay, that's an attempt, but we're not selfish. It was Ayn Rand that coined the phrase greed is good. Well, selling her novels, sure, that's fine. If you act in your own economic self-interest, and everybody does, kind of like I Pencil, if you ever wrote that essay, then the marketplace works. But if I work for my own independent economic self-interest, you do too, we all do this together, it all works really well. So to that degree, greed is good. But we're considered to be greedy or survival of the fittest or no government at all, or all that sort of stuff. And it's just not true. We are independent people. We are responsible people. We are caring people. I think that is going to be an enormous contribution that Gray Shark 2020 makes to our country. We do have a strategy for winning the election, which is we know full well we will never be able to compete in big states like New York and California, which Larry Sharp's from New York, I'm from California, but that's hopeless. Texas, Illinois, we'll never be able to compete there. But what we're going to do is to take our resources, figure out maybe 5 small states, independent states, and go and flood them with the resources we have. The media is less expensive, and Larry Sharp and I will go to town hall meetings, assuming that they're reopened, to grocery stores, Kiwanis meetings, look people in the eye and say, thank you. Your vote will make history. That if we win 2 or 3 states, small states, we'll probably get enough electoral college votes to keep both the Biden and Trumps from being able to get a majority in the electoral college. Then it will go to the House of Representatives. It's happened twice before in our history. And no Republican, I assure you, will vote for Biden. And no Democrat, I assure you, will vote for Trump, but they're restricted to the top 3 finishers, and we could very well win the presidential race as the compromise candidate. But even if we only win 1 state, that will make an enormous revolution for the Libertarian Party in our country. That for the rest of time, you'll see these maps of 2020 election, and you'll see the red victory states and the blue victory states. And then what's this gold one? Oh yeah, that's libertarians. We will get that legitimacy, and rightfully so. The nation is crying out for that third voice, and Judge Jim Gray and Larry Sharp are going to provide that voice for the benefit of our party, more importantly, for the benefit of our country. And that's the reason why we are running, and that's the reason why we're going to be successful.
Tell us what you would do in your first 100 days in office if elected president.
Well, you must find good quality people, good caring quality people. And I have some in mind. Many have endorsed our campaign already, but that's not the prerequisite. We would also have to start shining a light on what the government can do that's effective and what it can do that isn't. So I would try to pass what I lovingly call sunset provisions. We talked about these just a little bit earlier, to bring in each federal agency by itself to Congress, put on WSNBC, wherever, and ask them what they have done that's been successful, how much it's cost, and what do they plan on the future, and get rid of this duplication where a lot of people will start to see that's really not necessary. Chuck, we have some agencies that were put into effect during the New Deal. Now, maybe their names have changed, but they're doing the same thing. Do you want to know something really discouraging? I task you and our viewers to do this. Go Google the word The Plum Book, plum like the fruit, The Plum Book. And it's a federal list of all of the positions that the President of the United States can appoint to. About half of them have to be confirmed by the Senate. And you look at just goes down for tens, hundreds of pages. And each one of them has something like a salary of $186,000 a year. You just wonder why the government is so expensive. And you look at big government, you start showing this to people. Big government is really, really good, effective at one thing, and that is increasing the size, the cost, and the power of big government. So you look at agencies like the FDA, Federal Food and Drug Administration, and one of our sponsors, Tom Campbell, who was a former congressman, 5-term congressman, dean of the business school at University of California, dean at the Chapman Law School, he was on our All Rise podcast saying that, look, the FDA is now tasked legally, statutorily, with 2 things: to provide for the safety of various pharmaceuticals and their effectiveness. And the safety, of course, we don't want arsenic in our aspirin. But as far as the effectiveness, no. Let the customers decide the effectiveness. They're much better at it. And because of this mandate, I believe deeply that the FDA has killed thousands and thousands of people because they prohibited pharmaceuticals from coming on the market on a timely fashion. It takes about 10 years and something in the order of $2 billion to get one pharmaceutical medicine through the FDA. Unnecessary. It's cumbersome. It is causing problems. So these are the things that you'll start to do. Just have press conferences and show people the truth. Just show people what is going on here, and that government in a lot of ways has become the protected class, the privileged class in our society today. I was one time in Tahiti when we were taking a tour around the island, and all of a sudden we see this enclave just on a cliff overlooking the ocean. And so, oh, that's where really ritzy people, that's where privileged people live. They work for the government. I was thinking to myself, wow, that's just a logical extension of where we're going. You know, no, people in government should be public servants. They're serving us. Prosecutors, this is off the subject, but really important. I was a prosecutor. I will tell our prosecutors right away, all the U.S. attorneys and their assistant U.S. attorneys, as a prosecutor, you speak for us. You will do the right thing for the right reason every time. I'm not trying to put all these people in custody. Another thing that we need to look at, shine a light on, because shine a light is an important thing. The United States of America today has 5% of the world's population, 5%, and 25% of its prisoners. Senator Jim Webb, Democrat from Virginia, retired now, faced with those statistics, made the comment, either we're the most criminally oriented people in the world or we're doing something wrong. Which do you think it is? Chuck, on my radio show, I had a man by the name of, oh gosh, I'm sorry, Brooks, Justin Brooks. And he is the president, the chair of the Innocence Project in San Diego. He's an attorney. And he told me on the air, it was horrifying. He himself has walked 29 people out of state prison in California who were factually innocent. If we have today one person in prison that's factually innocent, that's an atrocity. 29 people just by himself and his project. These are things that we need to look at. We have too many people in prison today that should not be there. Geriatrics that were sentenced to 30 years in prison for, okay, maybe large marijuana offenses, but they're no threat to anybody. They grind up their food, they have ramps instead of stairways. They're not a threat to anyone. They shouldn't be there anymore. Charles Manson, people like that, of course, they should spend their life in prison. But we have overdone incarceration. We will call attention to that. And on a case-by-case basis, commute some of those sentences. All of these things we need to shine a light on. Sunset laws, the position of the federal government or the local government. And by the way, let me quickly say, I saw that President Trump has ordered in the pandemic has ordered stay away orders. You can't get closer than this and you're going to close down businesses. No, the President of the United States does not have that authority. It belongs to the states. Read the 10th Amendment. People should challenge it. I would say, no, I'm not going to send our troops as President of the United States. I'm not going to send our troops into combat for longer than 60 days without a declaration of war from Congress. What would that do? Chuck, you know this as well as I, and I hope our viewers do as well. If we were to require a declaration of war, all of a sudden we would have to do in public, Congress looking at who is the enemy here? Where are they? What is the threat to the security and national interests of our country? Analyze those things. What is our goal? How will we know when we reached it? Chuck, today, what's our goal that our troops are fighting for in Afghanistan? I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. We need to shine a light. The Constitution, by the way, and I'm really into the founders here. In fact, I will tell you something else. I'm off the subject, but this is important as well. The founders fought, bickered, debated about all kinds of things. But to a man, all the founders, the founders' delegates were male. To a man, each one agreed the most important function of government is protecting our freedoms and liberties from the encroachment of government. Should I say that again? They all understood that the most important function of government was protecting our freedoms and liberties from the encroachment of government. The number two important thing was our safety. I'm sure that our founders would take up arms against what we have done since that time. By the way, Thomas Jefferson, remember him, also said after the passage of the Constitution that we're going to need a bloody revolution every generation to keep the vested interests at bay. Now, Fortunately, the Constitution makes it so that the revolution does not have to be bloody. But Chuck, how long has it been since we've had a political revolution in our country? Probably the 1860s when the Republicans took over from the Whigs. And look at the vested interest today, both in government and outside of it. This must come to an end. We must bring that refreshing change, that libertarian revolution to shine a light on these things, pare back the intrusion, the cost, the power of government, and everyone will be better off.
Judge Gray, tell me about your involvement with the Johnson-Gray campaign in 2012. Could you briefly tell me what you did as a vice presidential candidate there?
Well, certainly. First of all, I was just truly proud to be able to represent the Libertarian Party in 2012. And by the way, when Governor Johnson asked me if I would do that, I said, look, I will, but only on the condition that we run to win. Of course, Governor Johnson said immediately, yes, that would be happening. And then he said something that I've quoted numbers of times, and I really almost lost my teeth. He said, Jim, if you happen to disagree with me during the campaign, feel free to say so publicly. I really don't think that Mitt Romney said that to Paul Ryan, and I assure you that Obama did not say that to Vice President Biden, but he was that confident. I want to get it right. So we went around the country, and it was the most exhilarating thing, Chuck, as well as the most frustrating thing of my life, because I felt that we had something to offer. I felt that we were better qualified than anyone else running. I felt we would do a better job to bring our country together, and we just couldn't get any traction. You know, we would go to these various places. I would be picked up by what I lovingly called my mother hens. They would pick me up at the airport. They would spend their own resources to travel, the gas money, and put themselves up in motels and the rest, taking me to various places. They were wonderful people. I'll put them up against anyone. There just aren't enough of us. And then, of course, we were not a part of the presidential debate. And if you're not considered to be viable. And we found out the so-called Commission on Presidential Debates, Chuck, is completely controlled by 5 heavy Republican commissioners and 5 heavy Democrat commissioners. And we got their documents as well, because we brought a lawsuit against them, basically for a monopoly, duopoly, and we were unsuccessful. But we got their documents, and it said literally, the purpose of the Commission on Presidential Debates is to get the Republican and Democrat views out to the voters. Not third parties, not neutral, no, just Republican and Democrat, which is exactly what they do. And they're going to do everything they can to keep us from being in those debates. They've, in effect, pushed out their League of Women Voters that used to be in charge of the presidential debates. And they wanted to keep their name, but the League of Women Voters would have none of it when they saw what was happening, when they saw that they were bridling the possibility of third-party voices. The League of Women Voters left with the saying, quote, "We will not be a part of the hoodwinking of America," unquote. The hoodwinking, we've been hoodwinked ever since. We must be a part of those debates. I hate to use this term particularly, but it's downright un-American. The criterion should be, like we argued in our lawsuit, unsuccessfully, I have to say, that any political party that's on enough ballots in enough states, technically to win the presidency, should have its voice heard. We were on the ballots in 2012 on 48 states. We even carried the torch for the Green Party. They were on the ballots in 40 states. How hard is it to get on the ballot? And that's a hard thing to do. To be on enough ballots technically to win in the Electoral College, that is certainly something. You're here for keeps. You have a voice to be heard, and it should be heard. So we're going to pursue that as well.
How long have you been involved in how long have you been a member of the Libertarian Party?
I was a lifelong Republican until the passage of the so-called Patriot Act. That was actually on the shelf at 9/11. The neocons just took it down, dusted it off, and used the emergency to get those things through, direct frontal attack on our civil liberty. So that was in early 2002. That's when I left the Republican Party. I've been registered. I'm a life member of the Libertarian Party within the last 18 and something years.
Have you served in any party leadership positions?
I have been a candidate, but no, I have not served. It's funny, Chuck, you bring this up.
Let me refresh your memory. That I believe you served on the Judicial Committee.
Oh, I did. Okay. Yes, I did. Pushed out of my mind. Yeah, you're right. I did. So thank you for that.
I think you chaired the Judicial Committee, which I chair right now. But
good. Okay. Well, let me quickly say that when I was on the bench for 25 years, when people would run for presiding judge, I would quietly take them aside and thank them, because I did not become a judge in order to be administrator. If they didn't do it, I was afraid somebody'd make me do it, and I didn't want to. And I did not join the Libertarian Party to be an administrator either. I want to be a spokesperson. I want to further the concept of liberty and our values and principles. So you're right. I guess I shoved that out of my mind, but thank you for your service, Chuck, on that one.
Do you vote Libertarian?
Oh, heaven's sakes, yes. I mean, I'll vote for the candidate. I'll vote for whom I believe, regardless of anything on merit, who the proper candidate would be. In California, candidly, for president, your vote's a wasted vote. The Democrat, no matter who it is going to win California. All votes for a Republican candidate for president in California are wasted votes. I vote in favor of people. I don't vote against people. I vote for whom I believe is the best candidate, and that's almost always a libertarian.
What if you were elected president, but Congress was solidly Republican or Democrat? Would you be able to enact and implement your agenda with an obstructionist Congress? How would you work with or around those who disagree with you?
With reason. Again, we will put in a coalition government, independents, libertarians, of course, but also Republicans and Democrats, as long as, again, I have to quickly say, they agree with our philosophy of live and let live, responsibility at all levels of society, don't tread on anybody, that sort of thing. But if they did, and then we're having these political problems, okay, you're in our cabinet, you're a Republican, you go talk with your colleague, you're a Democrat, talk with your colleagues, let's get on board, let's work this out. Go back to Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan. You know, if they could share a glass of bourbon in the evenings and talk with each other, we can too. I talk well with people. I listen well. By the way, Chuck, a little interesting deal. Do you know the word silent and the word listen have exactly the same letters in them? And it's a lost art in our society. I'm a judge. I've been trained to listen, and I do. And I get along with people. I don't compromise my values, but compromise in some ways, as long as they're not on principles, compromise is inherent in our genes. And that's what life is complicated, but I don't give away stuff. It's just, I think that I'd be able to do this. We'd take it over the heads of Congress in a lot of ways to the American people. You know, if your member of Congress is not voting in favor of this sunset provision to have an audit of the federal government, she is putting their issues ahead of yours. You talk to your members of Congress. I'll go over the heads. I'll have press conferences with the people. I will tell them exactly what's going on and then put the heat on those people who are obstinately and wrongly obstructing what we're trying to do for our country.
What are President Trump's best and worst executive accomplishments, in your opinion?
I believe in numbers of things that President Trump has done. To his credit, he has eradicated numbers of burdensome bureaucratic regulations. Hooray for that. I applaud that. Betsy DeVos is in the Department of Education. She's not been particularly effective, but the idea of spreading school choice is a very good one. I think that President Trump, with regard to his tariffs, is a vast mistake. The only good for tariffs is good. Let me go back again. Back to the Constitutional Convention. The Constitution prohibited the states from putting trade barriers amongst themselves or between themselves. But you could not, if you're in Maryland, put up a trade barrier for goods from North Carolina, for example. Can you imagine, had that not been there, the problems in commerce that we would have had? It would have been stifling our economy. Today, it's probably easier for North Dakota to trade with China than back then it was for Maryland to trade with North Carolina. So trade barriers are a hindrance. But if China is cheating, and I'm convinced that they don't abide by the world rules with regard to intellectual property, they steal our technology, all that sort of stuff. You publicize it. Hey, China, we caught you, you're doing this, and it's wrong. Join the world community. And unless you do, then we're going to join with the world community and put up trade barriers against you. But we'll take them down happily and gladly once you play by the rules. If he had done it that way, I think this would have been a good idea. Now, I don't know what his backroom decisions and discussions were. I'm not privy to that, but I should have been. And I hold it against him because tariffs, in effect, no, they're not paid for by China or otherwise. They're paid by our customers. They're paid by people here. It's all in the price of the goods and services. So these are mistakes. I think that closing our borders is simply wrong. Chuck, closing our borders to immigrants is simply wrong. It's not what America stands for. So there's a lot of bluff and bluster. And I don't talk about other candidates, but one thing I have certainly noticed about President Trump is he has no sense of humor. Have you ever heard him say anything intentionally funny, understanding jokes? So that troubles me, just as far as the way he approaches the presidency and the rest of us.
Judge Gray, you talked about this a bit in your top 3 issues, so I don't want to be repetitive, but if there's anything you want to add to what you say before, so I'm going to ask you, how would a libertarian president have dealt with the coronavirus?
We would have, first of all, planned in advance. One of the people running for president as a libertarian is Ken Armstrong. And he said, actually, I interviewed him on my show as well, and he said that he had been in charge of emergency preparation in the Port of Port of Los Angeles. And they, 3 years later, had a earthquake, and they implemented what he had planned. Sorry, when I say something my dog really agrees with, she starts barking. But he had implemented some emergency procedures that worked quite well. Our government was flat-footed, so they caused us harm. I'll close my door just a minute, please. Sorry. She's a wonderful dog, though. Gets excited. So that was the first failure. Libertarians would plan. This is something that government should do at state and local and as well as federal level. Number 2, the government was obstructionist, that the FDA, like I said, prohibited testing because you haven't gone through us yet, and didn't allow people like Elon Musk to produce things that were in need because he didn't have the right license, that sort of thing. That would not happen in a libertarian government. The government would get out of the way. I would go so far as to say, why not abolish FEMA, for example, and then just contract on a case-by-case basis with the Red Cross to have emergency relief? They would do it far better. So these are things that we would have had in place, and we would have had a balance. Yes, health is critically important, and we care about our people and the rest, but so are jobs, so is the economy. And so get away from all this arbitrariness, get away from these bailouts, and allow people to go to the bank like I did and make their own determinations. That would have been an entirely different approach. It would have been understandable. And if you treat adults as adults, they're going to start acting like adults. And I think that's the case too. But let me quickly say, I do agree with this social distancing, 6 feet away or whatever, that it is criminal assault. That if I have this coronavirus or if I have any contagious disease and I spread it to you by being closer than 6 feet, for example, that's called an assault. And the government has every right, I think, to prosecute or to prevent assaults. And that's what they've been doing. So I think this social distancing is a good idea. But can you go to church? Yes. No, you have to stay 6 feet away unless you're sitting with your husband or your wife, that sort of thing. But stay 6 feet away from others. So yes, you'll certainly flat out reduce the number of people in the church, allow television to do it as well. But it's just this overreaction by government, the fear mongering, and again, the political protection cover that I as a mayor, governor, whatever, get by overdoing it, because then I'm not politically responsible. We needed more political courage that libertarians would show, and we haven't seen anywhere else.
So we're broadcasting right now on what's mostly a gaming website. Tell me about your hobbies. Do you play any video games or board games or card games, or any other hobby you want to highlight to us?
Well, sure. Well, I do write musicals and I love music. I do play video games, solitaire, and I have my own 3 games actually 5 games on the video machine, and I play the circuit and see how quickly I can win those. I'm an old timer, Chuck. I still use playing cards to play solitaire as well. Yes, I have hobbies. I love to travel. I travel a lot. I enjoy that. In fact, when I run into people that travel a lot, I ask them a question. Do you travel quite a bit? Yes. Well, where's the most fascinating place you've ever been? And you can define fascinating any way you want to. And it's really pretty interesting to get these responses. About a third of them are the big animals in Africa. And then you'll get other places. In fact, I asked that of my favorite favorite professor at UCLA, Eugene Weber, who is a history professor. And I asked him that one time, and he said, well, it was Villa d'Este on Lake Como near Bellagio in Italy. And his wife said, oh, yes, that's the same. So when my wife and I went there, we made a special point to go to Villa d'Este, and he was right. It's pretty interesting. Travel is a really great thing to do. reading is a great thing to do. I can't remember off the top of my head who said it, but life is a book, and if you don't travel, you only read one page, something like that. So travel is something that I really enjoy doing. I would be, but for this coronavirus, my wife and I right this minute would be in Africa, at the Amazon, headwaters of the Amazon River in Peru. But of course, that was closed down. So I love to travel.
What are your campaign's target demographics? Would your outreach lean conservative, liberal, or in some other direction?
Yes. As you know, libertarians are classic conservatives. We're also classic liberals. We really do believe in more limited government, less intrusive, less powerful, less costly government. That's a conservative value that the Republicans have abandoned completely. No, we do that. But we're classic liberals. Like Thomas Jefferson said, live and let live. This is definitely a libertarian view. We are leaders with regard to trying to fight the prohibition of marijuana. You asked the first 100 days, I would certainly take marijuana off all schedules and try to repeal the Controlled Substances Act. It took a constitutional amendment to make alcohol illegal, the 18th Amendment. And it should have taken a constitutional amendment to make any of these other mind-altering drugs illegal. The government was really cagey about this. They never made any of these drugs illegal until President Nixon's time. But you go back to the Harris and Narcotics Act in the early 1900s, or the Marijuana Tax Act in 1937. These did not make those drugs illegal. They just made them tax violations. So you could sell me marijuana in 1938 or thereafter. You sell me $10 worth of marijuana, you'd have to pay a $15 tax and also fill out lots of cumbersome forms. And then they would prosecute me, not for the sale of marijuana, but for failing to pay the tax or failing to fill out their forms. So I would take these drugs off these schedules. The 10th Amendment does not allow it. It's left to the states, and then let each state decide how best to protect and serve its people. And so it would still be a criminal violation, federal law violation, if, for example, Indiana were to stay, that they wouldn't allow any marijuana there legal, and somebody were to then smuggle in marijuana from Illinois into Indiana, that would be a federal violation, but also allow each state, those 50 crucibles of democracy, let them decide how best to serve and protect their people. And soon cannabis will become regulated and controlled like wine. And by the way, I'll also say that the federal government committed a crime on us all in 1937 with the passage of the so-called Marijuana Tax Act, because they prohibited all research. And I'm totally convinced that CBD oil or other properties of marijuana, cannabis, which have no mind-altering properties whatsoever, are truly going to be a positive medical revolution for our country. And we have stifled that. We're only beginning to start up again, and it's just been a disaster. So we would get those schedules back to the states where they belong.
Tell us about your foreign policy.
My foreign policy, when I was with the World Affairs Council, I happened to be, and I'm not going to tell you what year this was so that I don't cast aspersion on any particular president, but I was sharing a glass of wine with the Consul General of India and the Consul General of Germany. The three of us were just standing there. And I asked each one, Consul General, tell us about the relationship between our government of the United States and your government. And he said, oh, we're partners, and oh, because I said, okay, I understand, you're a diplomat. Now, what is it really like? And he told me, looked me in the eye, and he said, you treat us like children. We're not partners. You tell us how it will be. And that's the way it's dictated. And the Consul General of India said, yes, I agree completely. That's exactly what it is. No, we're going to be partners in the world community. Of course, we will put our interests at stake, but we believe in free trade. We believe in getting along with people. By the way, Chuck, and I'm sure you know this, that if you're much less likely to start shooting people if they're your customers or your trade partners. So you bring in that trade. You bring in the exchange programs for students, for people, for ideas, and try to open up the world that way, including with Iran, including with China. I know full well there's some bad people in this world, and that I'll quote Thomas Jefferson again, any country that would beat their swords into plowshares soon will be plowing for someone else. Or quote Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. All of those things, you're not sophisticated unless you understand those, and we would be. Anyone that would tread on us would soon wish they had not, and they would know that. But we're not going to go into this adventurism, nation building. We're going to work with people, be a leader again in who we are, what we represent, By the way, first 100 days, Guantanamo will be closed. President tried that before. Congress wouldn't appropriate the money. I would say, hear ye, hear ye. I love that phrase, but hear ye, hear ye. Today is January 1st. By June 1st, if there's still any people incarcerated in Guantanamo, we're simply going to open all the gates and they will be free to leave. Now, if you want to bring them, if you feel that there's still a danger to the United States and they've committed crimes, want to bring them to our country, put them in, and give them a trial. Yes, give them a trial, and we'll see what happens. Feel free, Congress. If you don't want them to be transported over here, then we're going to open the gates. Guantanamo is a blight upon who we are as a country. That would be gone.
Judge Gray, let me see. What is the proper constitutional role of executive orders, and what would you accomplish as president with executive orders?
Let me start with this. When President Obama filed an executive order with regard to those DACA students, the DACA people, the people that were brought here at an early age, didn't understand, and they were maybe brought here from Ecuador at the age of 3. They don't speak Spanish. Here is their home. And he, I think, as a good idea, said, okay, by executive order, I'm going to decree that the law not be enforced so that those DACA students, those dreamers, will not be deported. Okay, he did not have the authority to do that. He is not a monarch. He cannot issue an executive order decreeing that the laws will not be followed. He should have changed the law. So he had no dispute, no complaint when President Trump came in and changed it. Had he done it right, had he gone to Congress, gotten the law changed, then of course Trump would have had to do the same thing. I don't at all feel that he could have done that. I would pass that law. I would feel that executive orders are not fiats. We have had presidents by executive order declare thousands and thousands of acres to be national monuments. I just don't think a president has that power. We don't have a monarch here. They're not going to set aside, take into federal, there's a separation of powers. The executive orders are meant to clarify, to clarify different rules. It's a big administration. Come on, Chuck, the federal government is the biggest company in the world, and it needs some guidance. So executive orders as to prosecutions, executive order from me would be to prosecutors, do the right thing for the right reason every time. I'll back you up. But if you become jaded, if you do things for personal reasons instead of the right reasons, we will hold you accountable. I would put that executive order out there. That's talking to the executive department on how our rules will be enforced, but it's not making laws.
What would you do about climate change?
I have, again, on my podcast, All Rise the Libertarian Way with Judge Jim Gray, talked to people from the Nature Conservancy, for example. One was a professor of economics, actually at the University of California, Santa Barbara, that is talking about the private sector and how well it addresses climate change issues. Today, we have these funds that goes into various places that are in desperate need, and they will take the polluters off the hook. Okay, well, if you pay such and such amount of money, then we'll pay the rest, and now that fund is out of money. What you do is instead you bring the victims to allow them to sue the perpetrator. So if you somehow put iodine or pollutants on my property, I will sue you, and you better have insurance or something, or you're going to be held accountable. That doesn't happen so much today. If you are upstream and you pollute the stream and it comes down and pollutes my area, I will bring a lawsuit against you. Today we'll have some class actions where mostly the attorneys make the money, or the government sues and then the victims don't get anything. Maybe they get an extra coupon or $12.30, and the government pockets the rest. So you bring the civil justice system into play. You allow the victims to bring a lawsuit, and you use companies or organizations like the Nature Conservancy that work really well with, for example, and it's demonstrable, they worked well with fishermen off the coast of California, and they segregated some areas and didn't allow any fishing there with the agreement of the people who were fishermen, so that they could perpetuate their profession, their employment. So you work with people. They've done wondrous works in Africa to keep the rhinos from being poached, or the elephants, because they show people how it's more important to them. They'll be more successful if, in fact, they work to conserve. So it's private organizations, but governments can do one thing, and that is they can put a bounty on things if they want to. For example, we have this big garbage patch or plastic patch out in the Northern Pacific, And I understand it's horrendous. You know, it's like 4 feet that the tides have brought all the plastic from China and India and the United States or wherever, and it all congregates there, and the fish are dying and the rest, and it's a big problem, and it just doesn't break down. So you could put a bounty on that and say, okay, for every ton of plastic you bring from there, we'll pay you $20 or something like that, and that would be of effective. But the private sector just does it better. Chuck, government is not really particularly good at fixing things. The private sector, the free enterprise system, that's what they do. We saw that in the coronavirus, et cetera. You know, when you see a problem in the private sector, you try to design something, a good, a product, a service that will address it, that will fix it. You go to a different issue. If you're talking about the homeless, and I'd like to talk about them if I may, but you talk about the homeless, you have one government bureaucrat that says, wow, you know, I'm more successful today because last year I was only administering 800 homeless. Now I'm overseeing 1,000. So I'm successful. I'm doing a good job. If you in the private sector, you'd say, wow, you know, we've been successful. Last year there were 800 homeless. Now there are only 600. It's just a different approach. So we want the results, but the private sector has an enormous part to play in it. They don't want to breathe bad air either or have bad water. So the private sector can do a great deal much more effectively.
The President of the United States gets to appoint judges to the Supreme Court, to the circuit courts, and to the federal district courts. What kind of judges would you appoint? And do you have a short list for the U.S. Supreme Court?
I have some people in mind for the U.S. Supreme Court, but I don't share it. I want to have judges that will look at the law, look at the facts, think about it, apply the law to the facts under the discretion, under our ethics of our profession, and make a ruling. You lose because I say so is never well received, nor should it be. So you should explain. I want people that have a good judicial temperament, we call it, so we get along with people. We know as judges, Chuck, that the only person that cannot get upset, get mad in the courtroom is the judge. And I want people of that good temperament. So I want well-rounded people. We're not experts. I'm a judge, I should know everything. No, it's the attorney's job to educate us as to what the law is, and certainly to listen to the facts. I want somebody that's well-rounded, even-tempered, and will administer justice and explain it. I want people in the Supreme Court that don't use their own personal dictates. I mean, we all are prisoned of our backgrounds, but I believe in stare decisis, which means that unless there's really a good reason to change the law, Plessy versus Ferguson, which allowed separate but equal, supposedly, education in 1896, that was precedent up until 1954 with Brown versus Board of Education. That law should be changed. But if it's close, then I believe in that precedent because we need, as a society, to get foreseeability. And judges can do that. We in the legal profession can do that, and we do. So you basically tell your clients, if you do that, that's logically what's going to be the result. If you do this, that will probably be the logical result. And all of a sudden, then, if the courts of appeals start changing that, it throws things into more chaos. So I want consistency under the law and under the facts, and I want even-tempered people to explain it.
How should we handle the debt crisis?
The debt crisis?
Yes.
I think I've discussed that quite a bit. It's the biggest security threat to our country. It is a question of overspending. Will I, in fact, and some candidates in the Libertarian Party say, oh, Judge Gray, would you agree that you're not going to sign a budget of more than such and such amount of money? And I say, no, I'm not going to agree with that in advance. That's arbitrary. I'm not going to make it arbitrary. I'm going to show the world, show our people, show our voters, show ourselves how this part of government is simply unnecessary. It's probably counterproductive. It's duplicative. It's not helping. Reduce it. Our educational system, Chuck, as I hope you agree, was really quite excellent. Public education system, when I was growing up, we had good schools. No one ever was saying that we had poor, failing schools. And then you get the Department of Education brought in the Carter administration. Now, all of a sudden, you have all of these bureaucrats shuffling papers. You have these laws there saying, you know, no child left behind and teach to the test and the rest of it. No, you get the government out of education. We save that money. We prune that back. I applied for Betsy DeVos to work with her when she became the head of the Department of Education. And my application didn't get anywhere. I'm sure she herself never knew I was applying, but the people that were her underlings there knew that I would probably do away with the Department of Education or pare it back. And they didn't want that to happen, so they were certainly not going to let Judge Jim Gray work there for that end. So, but there's too much of government, and it becomes a fiefdom. And so you show people that the debt is huge. You don't do that in your household or you go bankrupt. You don't do that in the states because you go bankrupt. It's the federal government that continues to borrow money that it does not have, and there's a cost to it. Kick the can down the road. I've talked about that. I've talked about politicians don't care about the future. All of these are realities that the Gray Sharp administration will bring to people, will explain to them as if they're adults. You're a part of this. It's our government, and if it's not working, it's our fault. Come with us, help us address it openly with reality and our principles, and then make it for the better. And that's what we will do. The debt is a huge issue that I have discussed.
So you mentioned before that you're running as a ticket with Larry Sharp for vice president. Can you tell me a little bit about Mr. Sharp?
Yes, first of all, go to the Sharp Way and just Google that, and you will see the Larry Sharp story. It's a video that shows his background, and he's overcome some real huge issues. He joined the Marine Corps actually at the age of 17. He wasn't supposed to do that. Became a sergeant, and I'm proud of him. He has become an entrepreneur. He started his own businesses. He speaks beautifully well. He educates people about entrepreneurship, and that's how he makes a living. He's just a really solid fellow. He does me proud by saying that he was not a libertarian until he heard Governor Gary Johnson speak and Judge Jim Gray speak in 2012. He said, wow, that's for me. I'm going to be a libertarian, and he still is. He has followers of 60,000 people on his Facebook account, things like that. So a lot more than I do, and certainly more into it. But he's just a good, solid fellow. I feel a bond with him. He lives in New York. I've not spent that much time with him personally, but he's really good, solid fellow. I could not have a better running mate, and we could not have a better team. He also, as you know, he ran for governor in the state of New York in the last election as a libertarian, and really got the message out quite well and did quite well.
Yeah, I believe he also got ballot status for the Libertarians, though that was yoinked by recent legislation.
Indeed.
If you lost the LP nomination for president, would you accept the nomination for vice president?
No.
Which former U.S. president did you admire the most?
Which former U.S. president?
Or current, I guess. Which U.S. president did you admire the most?
Sure. Thomas Jefferson. George Washington was a patriot. George Washington was a stalwart. He is the father of our country. More to the point, I read Doris Kearns' Team of Rivals about Abraham Lincoln, and she really got into the nuances. He really was quite a statesman, really was quite a fellow. I admire him tremendously. John Kennedy, because of the Peace Corps, he was inspirational. He was a hero of mine until I learned about his private life, and now he's no longer a hero. I think that President Truman was a good, I think, and I chuckle because President Truman one time was quoted as saying, always be sincere, even if you don't mean it, which I thought was kind of Harry Truman's idea. But I think Harry Truman, except for trying to take over the steel mills, but I think he arose to the occasion and was really quite a good president. Those would probably be my heroes.
What politician do you admire the most? Living or dead?
Well, today I have a great deal of difficulty finding any leaders in our politics today. There's a state senator named John Morlock, who is an economist, and I think he's a CPA. He spreads the word of the alarm about the pension funds that are not funded. He's a hero. He stands up for what he believes in, and I agree with him. There are others. Justin Amash has done a good job in standing up for what he believed in. I applaud that. Otherwise, I'm kind of at a loss. I don't see any particular leadership in our country today.
If you could change one government policy, what would it be?
Oh, come now. Okay, I mean, how can I narrow it down? Probably the sunset provisions to shine a light on all federal agencies and all federal laws. And maybe they were good for their intended purpose back in 1956, but maybe they're not so good for their purpose now. Reducing the bureaucracy to thwart people being able to succeed. I quote Milton Friedman, again, I know you've heard of him, who said that you get more of what you subsidize and less of what you tax. Today, we're subsidizing, in effect, victimization and laziness and taxing success. So guess what we get more of? Try to get that word out, to let people profit from their industry, their successes, their labors, and then try to reduce this victimization that we have. Again, just because I'm alive does not mean you owe me anything. And there is no such thing as entitlement in that regard. There is compassion, and that's what we exemplify.
Do you have any endorsements that you are proud of and want to highlight?
Yes, thank you. I have been endorsed by Jim Turley, who is from Altamonte Springs in Florida. He's in the city council there, they call it, and they call it commissioner, I think, but that city has no debt, and he has endorsed our campaign. It makes me proud. Jeff Hewitt is the Libertarian elected from as a board of supervisors here in Riverside County. Actually, Mark Whitney, as I told you, I think was a former candidate for president, and after the first debate dropped out and has endorsed us. Lincoln Governor Chafee has endorsed us. Mark Rutherford, Indiana, stalwart Libertarian, has endorsed us. There are others as well that are coming in, but those really make me proud. It's also it's a real burden to make sure I speak for these people. They put their trust in me. I mentioned Tom Campbell earlier, 5 terms member of Congress, just an intellectual, a wonderful man. He's endorsed our campaign. Jim Doty, who is an economist, University of Chicago, Friedman trained. I don't know if you know Dr. Jim Doty or not, he's now the president emeritus of Chapman University. He's the most successful person I've ever met. He took a sleepy Chapman College, turned it into a vibrant Chapman University, does wondrous things there. He's endorsed our campaign. So I'm very proud of it, but now it puts a great deal of heat on me to be able to live up to endorsements like that, but I'm sure I'm up to it.
Of the prior Libertarian Party presidential campaigns, which most closely resembles the campaign you want to run?
Probably go back to Ed Clark, who was a hero, how I found freedom in an unfree world, but he's practical, he's principled, and I am proud to be in Ed Clark's Libertarian Party.
What are a few of your favorite libertarian books?
Libertarian books?
Yeah.
I just mentioned one of them. Oh goodness, Free to Choose, Milton Friedman. I call it libertarian because it is. There are others. Gosh, it's right behind me. But the Reason Foundation's put out some really excellent, edited, really excellent books on. And now my dog's barking to get in, but on libertarian issues. That's probably Reason Foundation or Reason Magazine is certainly a favorite of mine.
Why?
I'll let my dog in again. Sure. Okay, you. I'm sorry, we don't call her the princess for nothing. So what she says goes. Her name is Nixie.
Hey, Nixie. So why are you the best candidate to represent the libertarian brand?
My background, I believe it. I know they all believe it. I'm a pragmatist. I'm an incrementalist, actually, where I was on Pat Ford's show a little while ago, and he self-proclaims him to be an anarchist. I want to abolish all public education. Okay, Pat. So you'll scare people. 10 years from now, you'll be pure, philosophically pure, but 10 years from now, we'll be in the same position that we are now or worse. I want to bring quality competition to our schools. So I want to bring in some charter schools. I want to have some homeschooling. I want to have school vouchers and school choice so that 10 years from now, no, we're not going to have it all universally around the country, but people are going to be able to see from example, hey, that really worked. I want my child to go there as well. This is what we want. And by the way, then the public schools will start getting more competitive because they'll see if their customers are leaving them, either they'll get more competitive or they'll be replaced by others that will be more competitive. So you show by example. So that's what I do. It's in my background. I have put in very positive and successful programs. We started a peer court here in Orange County schools, and it was my idea. We got the Department of education together with the probation department, the Constitutional Rights Foundation, and we put in peer courts where we actually take juvenile cases, real juvenile cases, to now 14 high schools countywide, and let the student jurors ask questions of the subject and the subject's parents. Then after they get enough information, then they will retire, come up with a suggested sentence, and then a real judge will impose it. And if the subject then completes the sentence within 4 months, the charges are dismissed. It's a diversion program. And so, but everybody learns, and the parents learn, hey, the kids expect me actually to be a parent. You're not your child's friend. You're their mother. You're their father. That's different. You know, they expect responsibility there. And then the student jurors get to see, well, wow, you know, I was going to smoke some marijuana. I was going to ditch school. I was going to joyride my parents' car. But no, that's not me. That's not who I am. So you focus on actual mentoring. And so I'm proud of that. I have that in my background. You know, I started the first drug court in the country, probably. Within 6 months of my being on the bench, I saw that the need that was not being addressed most in the court system was alcohol-related offenses. Within 6 months, I had up and running a drug court. It's practical. It's addressing the real issues. I was given awards by Mothers Against Drinking Driving, for heaven's sake, as well as the Board of Supervisors. So I'm an activist. I'm a doer. I'm, in effect, still in the Peace Corps, or what some of my friends call me, I'm a bearded outside agitator in disguise.
So a slight spin on the previous question. Why are you the best candidate to build the Libertarian Party and to build the Libertarian movement?
Well, I think I spent a fair amount of time talking about that, Chuck, that we're going to change the culture. We're going to make it accessible. I am a mainstream candidate. Why I came out against our nation's drug policy. I mean, who better than a conservative judge in a conservative county that's never used any form of illicit substance? At least they'll have to listen to the message. I have no axe to grind. I was in the Peace Corps. I care about people. I've been in the military and all that sort of thing. So I bring kind of a stature, I guess. I don't mean to blow my horn too much, but I'll get a listenership. People will listen to me where I'm not gaining personally by any of this. It's for our country. I love my country. I care about my country. I want my country to excel. And I think that people will listen to that.
Have you spoken with policy experts at libertarian think tanks about your policy positions? And do you have policy experts advising your campaign?
The answer is yes and yes, but they're in the background. If I were to mention their names, then it might imply that they're endorsing me, which may be true or may not. But yes, I have spoken to people. Reason Magazine. The answer is yes.
If you receive the nomination, will you campaign full-time for the general election, or will this be a part-time campaign?
No, I will. Larry Sharp told me as well that we're both going to campaign full-time, assuming that we get away with these travel restrictions and the rest. I mean, if you don't have any in-person conventions, I do a lot of things like I'm doing right now. It's just on the internet and podcasts and the rest. But yes, very likely that we will go to those 5 small states and try to win 2 or 3 of them, like I said before. If the New York Times or the New Orleans Herald wants to interview us, or the ABC News, of course we will. And we're certainly not going to turn our backs on anyone in California, New York, Texas, or otherwise. But yes, we will be on the road virtually the whole time in these various states campaigning as libertarian candidates.
Will you campaign with down-ticket libertarian candidates for Congress and state rep and so forth?
I've done that forever. I've done that ever since I became a libertarian. The answer is yes. We will assist. We've raised thousands of dollars for down ballot candidates, and Larry Sharp, of course, as well. That's demonstrable. The answer categorically is yes. We'll legitimize their position. Like we say, we'll change the culture so that people will start saying, well, wow, if Judge Gray would do that as president, well, maybe George Jones here and Amy Smith would do that on our city council. The answer is yes. That's how you grow the party.
Will you remain at the Libertarian Party far into the future, whether you win or lose the nomination?
I know you wrote these questions in advance, Chuck, and I don't mean to be confrontational, but I find that to be insulting. Yes, of course.
I'm not meaning to insult you. We have had several past candidates who have left the party. So.
Oh, you mean like Bob Barr and Bill Weld, for example?
There are a few.
I know.
Okay, so that actually gets through my prepared questions. I have a few questions from the chat if you have time for like 3 or 4 more questions.
I have another 15 or 20 minutes if you wish.
Great.
It's fun to chat.
On the subject of the war on drugs, Someone in the chat asked, how about selling to kids? Can a parent protect a kid from using drugs?
Heaven's sakes, under all circumstances. First, let me take a step back. I would not legalize any of these drugs. Legalization, think aspirin. You know, your 12-year-old daughter could go to your local pharmacy and buy a case of it if she wanted to. No, it could be generic, it could be name brand, price is set by the free market, no restrictions on advertising. I don't know anybody that wants that to happen. So yes, we need age restrictions. The problem is, of course, in today's illegal market, don't take my word for it, ask the next 10 teenagers you find, if you wanted to, what would be easier for you to get? Marijuana or alcohol? And every last one of those will say, if they wanted to, it would be easier for them to get marijuana because the dealers don't ask for age restrictions. So bring it under regulation and control, and then you stop the habit of so many young people using this stuff. I quote in my book, Why Our Drug Laws Have Failed, the mayor of Amsterdam in Holland, and he said that we only have half the marijuana usage in our country because they decriminalized this a long time ago. We only have half the marijuana consumption in our country, hear this, both for adults and for teenagers, than you have per capita in the United States. And he went on to say why. And you know what he said? We have succeeded in making pot boring. We glamorize it because it's illegal, and we also have such a violent profit motive that gets people to go out there and sell it. We couldn't do it worse if we tried. I do not want our children to be using these drugs. I think it's harmful for them to use these drugs, unless it's under the medical part. Methamphetamines scare me to death. Chuck, you may not be aware of this. In this crack cocaine epidemic that we had in our country, but countries that regulated and controlled it, like Holland, never had crack cocaine come in because powder cocaine was available at modest prices, and they knew the quality control. So crack cocaine was an economics problem, more bang for the buck, in effect. If you can't afford crack, if you can't afford powder cocaine, then you're going to use crack. That wasn't involved. They don't have any fentanyl problem there either. That's kind of an artificial heroin that's been inflicted upon us by drug prohibition. It goes on and on. So yes, I care about our children so much that I want to regulate and control these drugs and take away lots of money from Mexican drug cartels, juvenile street gangs, who, by the way, use this as a recruiting tool. Hey, you want to make some money, my son, my daughter? Come and join our gang and sell these drugs and make some money. You know, that's where we're going wrong. So we will regulate and control marijuana, for example, and reduce teenage use instead of increase it. Other than that, again, I have no thoughts whatsoever.
How can you fix the government when so many people are dependent on the government for their ill-gotten gains?
Well, I'm not going to call it ill-gotten gains, and I can't fix anything. It's kind of like saying, how are you going to solve such and such a problem? No, I've already said you resolve it. You just do the best you can, make it better tomorrow than it is today. The federal government is an enormous institution. I called it earlier the largest company in the world, and it is by far. And it's kind of like trying to change the course of a battleship. You know, it takes you miles and miles to even start turning one. So you call attention. The best way you do it is shining a light. The best way you do it is enforcing democracy, freedom of discussion, open discussions. I was on a show called Ask Me Anything. It's a libertarian show. I don't think that President Trump has ever been on an Ask Me Anything show. We will openly discuss things. Freedom of Information Act will be there. We will discuss things openly. Yes, we need some secrets. I play the game of bridge, Chuck. You asked me before. Not many people do that anymore, but you have, you know, in bridge, as they say in politics, only a dummy puts all his cards on the table. You're not going to say everything you know, because that's just unrealistic and not sophisticated. You've got to keep some secrets, but we're going to be transparent as much as we can. And when we make decisions, we will explain why, and we will try to get the government out of your life unnecessarily. This intrusiveness of government is just out of control.
I actually play bridge myself, and I have streamed bridge on Twitch, so quite familiar with bridge. So the final question here. The chat has been buzzing about intellectual property, and there are some libertarians who disagree about the proper role of intellectual property in government and in society. Should intellectual property exist? Should it be reformed, or is it fine basically as is?
Yes, it should exist. you should have a profit motive to be able to profit from your labors. And if you come up with a better way of doing something, trade dressing for your products. If I were to design a Coca-Cola or something, Coca-Cola, and put it in something that looked like a Coca-Cola bottle and mislead the people and make it red and make it kind of look like Coca-Cola, that should be a crime. That should be an offense. That should be something that should be compensable. No, I think that we need to allow people to profit. I've written 2 musicals. Should other people be able to take my musical and perform it and not give me a royalty? No, it's my property, and I should be able to do that. One of them already I've donated, Americans All. I learned from my peer court experience, and it's on private sector. And if go to judgejimgray.com, click on Americans All, and if you're involved in a school group that would like to perform it, feel free. I'll offer it to you for no charge. But that's voluntary. I could charge you. We could work out an agreement. You'd pay me this amount of money or whatever. I waive that, but that's my decision. So libertarians agree and disagree on lots of things. I believe in intellectual property. I believe that China is stealing it. I believe that that's wrong. I think that they're stealing our technology. I think that's wrong, and it should be governed and controlled.
Thank you. So that gets through all my questions. Is there anything I haven't covered that you want to talk about?
Chuck, I still just deem myself to be in the Peace Corps. I wasn't looking for this, but what sets me apart from a lot of people, I think, when I was in high school, I realized that one of the worst things that could happen to a person would be on your deathbed and look back over your life and think, I wish I would have, or I wish I would not have. And I did not want that to happen to me. I've taken advantage of opportunities if I've had them. And the choice that I made to run for campaign for president under these circumstances, in these times, under these situations, if I were on my deathbed looking back, I would have wished that I would have run. And I'm running out of conviction. I believe in our country. I believe in our libertarian movement, not because of any gratification or glorification. It just works. It works better than anything else. And if I would be honored to be the libertarian nominee with Larry Sharp, who of course that's a separate election. We're not running in tandem yet, but I'll certainly request that the libertarians select him for my vice presidential candidate. It will make me proud. Gratification is a wonderful thing, and I will be gratified if I can win this nomination. I will deem it to be an honor. I will do you proud. I will do everything I can to do you proud.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And again, for people who want to find out more about the Gray Sharp campaign, you can go to graysharp2020.com. That's GRAYSHARPE 2020.com. And I'll put that link, when I put this on YouTube, I'll put that link down in the comment section. So I really appreciate you talking with me, and I will send you a link to all of this. And for the people on the chat, thanks for watching. I'm going to send you to another channel.
There's one more thing as well. If you want to communicate with me directly, you can do it through judgejimgray.com, G-R-A-Y, judgejimgray.com. There's a contact there, and I will respond. I always respond to my contacts. So, Chuck, thank you for what you're doing. I wish you well and look forward to talking with you again sometime soon. And maybe at the convention, we can rub elbows or something.
Absolutely. I'll certainly be a delegate, and if we have an in-person convention, I'll certainly be there, though I'm skeptical. I think we'll go all online, but we'll see. Anyway, thanks so much. Have a great day. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Good luck to us all. Take care.